جمعان فبإذن الله وليعلم الذين نافقوا وقيل لهم تعالوا قاتلوا في سبيل الله أو ادفعوا قالوا لو نعلم قتالا لاتبعناكم هم للكفر يومئذ أقرب منهم للإيمان يقولون بأفواههم ما ليس في قلوبهم والله أعلم بما يكتمون الذين قالوا لإخوانهم وقعدوا لو أطاعونا ما قتلوا قل فادرءوا عن أنفسكم الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون فرحين بما آتاهم الله من فضله ويستبشرون بالذين لم يلحقوا بهم من خلفهم ألا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Ahsant. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My condolences to you all on the Ayam of Sajjadiyah. Thank you all for coming. Alhamdulillah, we're very blessed to have with us our dear Sheikh Syed Ali Moosavi. Please help me welcome him up with a loud salawat by Muhammad wa al Muhammad.
If you bring it down, we'll just raise this. أعوذ بالله من شر الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. I wanted to inshallah begin tonight by reciting a Surah Fatiha for the following individual. You know, many times when we come to these programs, we realize that this year we have come and there were others who would attend in years past who are no longer with us. We ask that Allah has mercy on them, He forgives them their sins. Let us recite a Surah Fatiha for Mir Taqi Ali Khan, the son of Mir Alam Ali Khan, after reciting a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Imagine, my dear brothers and sisters, that an individual came to you right now and he told you that there was a very powerful enemy that had come and they were at the edge of the city that you live in. And that this enemy was extremely powerful, unbelievably powerful, beyond anything that you could ever imagine. They had all of the best weapons, and they had a very deep animosity for each and every one of you. That as soon as they were to attack, as soon as they were to enter into the city, they would kill every single person that they could lay hands on, regardless of whether they are young or old, regardless of whether it is man, woman, or child. They would wipe out every single one of you without any hesitation. How would you react if you heard this news? It's natural that if we heard this news, someone told us this, they were trustworthy, what would end up taking place is that we would gather instantly and we would begin to ask ourselves, how do we defend ourselves against this enemy that is coming? We would form groups, we would make conferences, we would discuss, we would fundraise, we would do everything possible so that we could defend ourselves against this very powerful and this hated enemy that was coming. But what is interesting is that we have such an enemy. And we have been told, the announcement has been given to each and every one of us. But for some reason, the way we are as human beings, we don't really give it any weight. We are ignoring that enemy that is at the gates. Who is the enemy? The enemy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us about. He has warned us about. It is none other than the shaitan. And we don't get any clearer announcement than what comes to us in the verses of the Holy Quran. In the Quran, Allah has warned each one of us. He has said that inna shaytana kana lil insani aduwan mubina. Allah has warned us. He said that indeed the shaitan is to you a very clear enemy. It's something that all of you should know about. Allah is telling us this. In another verse of the Holy Quran, Allah again, He addresses this time our forefather, Adam alayhi salam. He says, فَقُلْنَا يَا آدَمْ إِنَّ هَذَا عَدُوٌ لَكْ وَلِزَوْجِكَ فَلَا يُخْرِجَنَّكُمَا مِنَ الْجَنَّةِ فَتَشْقَى. Allah, He tells our forefather Adam, He says, Ya Adam, this is indeed an enemy of yours and your wife. So be careful of him. Do not allow him to expel you from paradise, or else what? He says you will become miserable if you allow this to happen. But in spite of this clear warning, we deal with shaitan as if he doesn't even exist. We deal with shaitan almost as if it is mythology. It's something that's it's not really that big of a deal. And so what ends up happening is that we become easy prey for the shaitan. Tonight, what I wanted to begin with, inshallah, is that I wanted to begin with going into the story of who shaitan even is. Because in order to understand this enemy of ours, we have to understand why he hates us. We have to understand what the root of that animosity even is. When we go back, and this story, it actually begins even before the creation of Adam alayhi salam. When we go back before that time, one of the things that we see is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is known to be Al-Khaliq. Allah is known as the creator. Meaning what? Meaning that Allah is one who loves to create. And so even before He created us, our race, our species, He had created other beings. Some of them Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us about, but the majority of them He doesn't tell us about. We don't need to know. It's not important for our lives in this world. Of course, we know that He had created the malaika, these angels. But alongside the angels, He had also created another race of beings known as the jinn. The jinn are very similar to us. Many times when we think about the jinn, one of the things that we think of this army of evil beings. But that isn't the case actually. The jinn are a creation just like our creation, the human race. That amongst them they have different families. They have different tribes. Just like us within the human race, we have some people that are very tall, some that are very short, some that are very wide, some that are very thin. The jinns are the same. They have different shapes and sizes. They belong to different groups. And also amongst them, they have believers and they have disbelievers. They have those that believe in Allah, they accept and they worship Allah, and they have those that reject. One of those beings that was a believer in Allah was a being known as Iblis. We tend to see Iblis as a very evil being. He wasn't evil at that time. He was in fact one of the very pious members of the jinn, so pious that he had risen rank upon rank upon rank to the level that he was now worshipping Allah alongside the malaika. The malaika, they don't have desires like we do, like the jinn do. The malaika, when Allah tells them to do something, they obey Allah. They don't have any desire to say no. They want to obey. This being, Iblis, he rises until he is now worshipping Allah at this rank that he is at the level of the angels. During this period, as he is worshipping Allah, he is in this very high rank, Allah begins to create another being. Now, the details of this I don't want to get into tonight. It's a whole different discussion. But the traditions and the Quranic verses, they mention that Allah creates this being of Adam out of mud. Now, whether this is metaphorical, whether it is metaphysical, whether it is literal, I don't want to get into that, inshallah. It's a discussion for another day. But Allah begins to create this being, and it is visible to the malaika, and it is visible to who? To Iblis, who is worshipping Allah at the level of the malaika. They're watching this being being created, whatever that process of creation may have been like. Then at one point, Allah, He turns to the angels. What does He say to them? This is the story of our creation. He turns to them and He says the following. He says, وَإِذْ قَالَ رَبُّكَ لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ إِنِّي جَائِلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. He says to the angels that, "O my angels, I am going to place this being that you see, this creation that I am creating out of mud, I am going to be placing him as my representative, as my vicegerent, Khalifa, on the face of the earth." What do the angels respond with? They're very surprised. They're very surprised and they turn towards Allah and they say, قَالُوا أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا وَيَسْفِكُ الدِّمَاءَ وَنَحْنُ نُسَبِّهُ بِحَمْدِكَ وَنُقَدِّسُ لَكَ. The angels are shocked. They turn towards Allah. They say, Ya Allah, are you going to really place within this earth this representative that you are going to make him as your representative? Are you really going to place therein one that sheds blood and he creates corruption? Now, the angels, they're not asking from a position of, why are you going to create him? It's not from that perspective. They're genuinely curious that, Ya Allah, why would you create this being that we know is going to commit these horrendous crimes on the face of this earth? Now, question. How is it that the angels knew this? How is it that as soon as they saw this creation of Adam, they knew that this is a being that is going to commit these horrible crimes? One of the answers is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He had created other beings that were like Adam before Him. He had created these beings, and so when the angels, they looked at him, they saw the resemblance that there were these other beings that Allah had created before him that committed these horrible crimes. They were just these vicious, violent beings. But Allah also, He tells them something interesting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the answer that He gives to them, He says, قَالْ إِنِّي أَعْلَمُ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. He says that I know what you know not. And what He's explaining to the angels, that which is going to become clear later on in human history, is that from these beings, from this Bani Adam, is going to rise such human beings that you're going to understand why I created this race. When we look at the events of Karbala, when we look at Rasulullah, when we look at the Ahlul Bayt, it becomes exactly clear why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is telling the angels, I know what you know not. Allah is creating this being that in order for him to have this high potential, he needs to have also the potential of sinking to the lowest of the low. If you have a being like the malaika, like the angels, who don't have the desire to sin, then the good that they do is going to be limited. It's not going to be as high in potential. But when you have a being that can commit horrendous crimes, he has a nature which maybe calls him to certain actions, and he refuses and he climbs to the pinnacle of what it means to be a servant of Allah. This is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us. And He's created us with this potential to reach the highest of the levels. But when Shaitan, he sees this creation of Adam, and the angels, they see it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He turns to them when that creation of Adam has been completed, and He gives them a very simple command. What does He say? He turns to them and He says, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ اسْجُدُوا لِآدَمَ فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ أَبَى وَاسْتَكْبَرَ وَكَانَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. Allah, He gives this command. He says that, O malaika, and of course the Iblis, he is doing this worship alongside at the level of the malaika. He says that I want you to do something. I want you to go down in sujood before this creation of mine, before this potential that He holds within him, before all of those individuals that are going to come from him. All of the malaika, of course, they don't have any desire to sin. They go down in sujood except Iblis. Iblis refuses, and he becomes one of those who is from the kafirin. He is from those that disbelieve. Now, key point here, which is very interesting, is that usually when we use the word kafir, we use it for who? We use it for disbelievers. We say that this individual, he doesn't believe in Allah. And usually what it means is that that individual doesn't know, for example, about Islam. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He's using it in this verse, He's using it for an individual that not only recognizes Allah, but he's been worshipping Allah for 6,000 years. What is the sin of the shaitan here? The sin is that he refuses to recognize the authority of Allah. He knows Allah exists. He worships Allah. But he says that if you tell me to do this, I refuse to recognize that authority that you have. Now here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He asks Iblis, who now has become shaitan, He asks him this question that, Ya Iblis, why is it that you refused to do sujood? After all, you're a being that has been worshipping me for 6,000 years. I asked you for something simple. Do sujood before this being. It's not a big deal. One sujood. You know, when we look at us, we do how many sujoods every day? We do many sujoods. Iblis is being asked for one sujood, and he's refusing. Allah asks him this question in the Quran. Why is it that you refused? Shaitan, he comes back with an amazing answer. He says, أَنَا خَيْرٌ مِّنْهُ خَلَقْتَنِي مِن نَارٍ وَخَلَقْتَهُ مِن طِينٍ. He says, Ya Allah, the reason why I refuse to do sujood before this being of yours, before this Adam, is that I am better than he is. Why? Because you created me from fire, and you created him from this lowly mud. Therefore, a being like me can never do sujood before a being like him. Now here, something interesting happens. Allah, of course, He sends down the shaitan. He says that you have lost that lofty position that you had with me. You need to leave this position and this rank that you had. Leave this place. When Allah, He asks this, what ends up happening is that shaitan, he turns towards Allah. And you know, the shaitan, he has a very important choice to make at this point. What are the two choices that shaitan could be making? Number one, and the most obvious choice, what should shaitan have done at this point? He should have done tawbah. He should have done, Ya Allah, I made a mistake. I slipped up. Please forgive me. Allah would have forgiven him. What does shaitan do instead? As we say today, he doubles down. He's committed a sin, now he's going to double down on it. What does he ask Allah? He says, قَالَ أَنذِرْنِي إِلَى يَوْمِ يُبْعَثُونَ. He asks Allah for a request. He says, Ya Allah, give me respite until the day of judgment. Don't punish me now. Give me opportunity, give me time until the day of judgment. Ya shaitan, why didn't you just apologize? It's so easy, just do tawbah. Allah is going to accept. He doesn't accept. He refuses. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives them a positive response. He says, قَالَ إِنَّكَ مِنَ الْمُنْذَرِينَ. He says that indeed you are among those who has been given respite. Now question. Why does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give shaitan this opportunity? Because you know, in reality, the opportunity that He's giving is what? He's giving him the opportunity to come after us. Ya Allah, why did you give shaitan this opportunity? If only you had eliminated him, begin to punish him at that time, we wouldn't have to deal with all of these issues that we deal with today, all of these problems. The answer is twofold. Number one, shaitan had worshipped Allah for 6,000 years. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just. He doesn't take someone that has done something good, that has struggled, that has sacrificed, and say, you know what, I'm not going to give you any reward for this. And so He gives shaitan this opportunity. He says, Ya shaitan, I'm not going to punish you. I'm going to give you this opportunity. You're free. As a result of the good that you have done, that ibadah that you have done. But there's a second reason as well that comes back to me and you. And that is that us as human beings, if you ask yourselves this pivotal question, that how is it that we grow as human beings? What is it that gives us this great potential that Allah has given to me and you? It is the fact that there is someone that is trying to mislead us. He is using every tactic, every tool at his arsenal. And we are utilizing every tool in our arsenal to make sure that we're not tricked by him. My brothers and sisters, the growth that we see in this world, it comes from the resistance that we go against. That resistance that we are forced to fight against. When fighting against the tricks of the shaitan, that is the element that allows us to become who we are. So this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He doesn't take shaitan, doesn't punish him immediately. Now, shaitan then, he says something very unique. And this is something that me and you, we should take into consideration. He says, قَالَ فَبِمَا أَغْوَيْتَنِي لَأَقْعُدَنَّ لَهُمْ صِرَاطَكَ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ. Shaitan, he turns towards Allah. He says, Ya Allah, because you have misled me, because you have caused me to deviate. Look at the arrogance of this being. Allah, He says what? He says, do sujood. Shaitan, he says no. Then shaitan, he doubles down, he turns towards Allah, and he says, you did this to me. This is really a high level of arrogance. But he says, because you have caused me to fall, because you have misled me, Ya Allah, I am going to sit in ambush for this insan, for this Banu Adam, for us, where I am going to sit in ambush on your straight path. Key point. He doesn't say that I'm going to wait until they go into a bar and they are drinking alcohol. That is where I'm going to ambush them. No. He says that I'm going to wait until he's going to do something good. He begins to give charity. He does tawbah. He begins to do more prayers. He begins to be good to his parents. It is at that moment that I'm going to come and I'm going to try to ambush him. Otherwise, I don't need to do anything. If I see someone in the bar, if I see someone in the nightclub, I don't need to do anything. He's already on my path. But I'm going to wait until I see that he is on the straight path of Allah. And by the way, this is why we need to be careful, my brothers and sisters. Sometimes people ask, they say, why is it that in the masajids, in the Muslim community, sometimes there's more conflict than anywhere else? You know, you go to work, Google, Facebook, everyone is working together for the most part. Everything is smooth. But as soon as you come into the masjid, someone is doing ghibah, someone is saying this, someone is doing that. The reason is that shaitan, he is focusing all of his efforts on who? When you are at the closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's very important that we keep this in mind, that as we rise, as we grow, shaitan is going to focus on us more. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Now here, I don't want you to make a mistake. Because there's a mistake that we all make at this point. And that mistake is that whenever we speak about shaitan, we always speak about shaitan as this very evil being. But I mentioned that the beginning of the shaitan was a very good beginning. In fact, the beginning of the shaitan, it was a beginning that maybe I don't have, you don't have. Because none of us can say that we have worshipped Allah with the intensity and for the time period that the shaitan has worshipped Allah. The shaitan, my brothers and sisters, he is very similar to us. We can make the same mistakes that the shaitan made. We have to be very clear here. Because if we look at the sins of the shaitan, really, if we condense the sin of the shaitan, we find two things. Sin number one, what is it? It's the sin of arrogance. Shaitan, he looked at this other being, and what did he say? He said that I am better than he. Why? Because I'm different. My substance is different. My brothers and sisters, how often do we do this? How often do we look at another human being and we say that I am better than he? I am better than she. Why? Because I belong to a different group. I belong to a different socioeconomic level. I belong to a different tribe. I belong to a different nation. I'm better than he is. Sometimes it's not even conscious. We're driving around or walking around and we are judging people as we see different human beings. The root of that arrogance, it begins to grow within us just as it grew in the shaitan. Don't think that the shaitan, maybe he wasn't conscious of this arrogance. He hadn't thought about it. He hadn't thought to purify himself. But deep within, as those years of ibadah was going, as he was rising level after level after level, that arrogance was growing stronger and stronger within him. Sometimes we see this, unfortunately, within the believers. They feel that because I am a believer, I am the beloved of Allah. These other people, they're nothing. And they begin to look down on them. This was sin number one. Sin number two that we see, and again, this is a sin that we might also be committing. It's a lack of submission to Allah. What did Allah ask from the shaitan? He said, Ya shaitan, Ya iblis, I want you to do this one action. Do sujood. Shaitan refuses. He's willing to do any other act of ibadah. Ya Allah, if you want me to pray, I will do 1,000 rakats. I will do 1,000,000 rakats. If you want me to give charity, I will give charity. If you want me to fast, I will fast. But not this one action that you're asking me. Do we also do this? We also do this sometimes. We say, Ya Allah, I'll do this, and I'll do this, and I'll do this, but this one, I don't want to do. I don't want to do it. You know, we have a story in our traditions that later, many years after the death of Adam alayhi salam, shaitan approaches one of the prophets of God. And he tells the prophet that I'm tired of this animosity and this war that I'm waging against this insan, this human being. He says that tell Allah that I am ready to do tawbah. I'm ready to ask Allah for forgiveness. This prophet, he goes, he relays to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, And he says that what I want from the shaitan is for him to go to the grave of Adam and do sujood there. Shaitan, when he hears this, he says anything but that. I'm willing to do anything but that. My brothers, sometimes this is us. This is us sometimes. When we look at shaitan, we shouldn't look at him as this being that is pure evil. He is pure evil. But he gradually, step by step, he got there through this issue of arrogance and this issue of his lack of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we look at Karbala, I just wanted to mention, it's a little bit of a side point, but I wanted to mention this as well, that some of the figures, people that we see within early Islamic history, their story is very similar. You know, all of you are familiar of the story of Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, right? Very pivotal character in the events of Karbala. His father was a man by the name of Ziyad ibn Abi. And they would call him Ziyad ibn Abi. The reason behind it was that his father was unknown. You know, the Arabs of that time, if they didn't know who your daddy was, they would call you Ibn Abi, right? We don't know who his father is. Ziyad ibn Abi, when we look at his history, we find that from the very beginning he is with Amirul Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib. Recite the salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He was with Ali alayhi salam. And throughout all of the battles against Muawiyah, he fought against Muawiyah. He is in the battle of Siffin on the side of Imam Ali fighting against Muawiyah. When Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he passes away, he is still on the side of Imam Hassan. When Imam Hassan alayhi salam, he signs a peace treaty with Muawiyah, even then, he refuses to join the side of Muawiyah. So Muawiyah is sitting there thinking, how is it that I can get this individual to come to my side? And by the way, Ziyad ibn Abi, very intelligent. His ability to act as a politician, as a diplomat, in order to move all of the chess pieces of politics, he was bar none. Amazing. So Muawiyah, he sees there's this individual who, he's not on my side. He says, what is it? What is the price in which I can buy Ziyad ibn Abi? He's been fighting against me all of these years on the side of the Ahlul Bayt. He asks people, he says, what is it that this Ziyad wants more than anything else in this dunya? They say that the one thing that Ziyad wants that he can't have is he needs lineage. Because for the Arabs of that time, lineage was everything. The tribe that you belong to, the father that you had, the grandfather that you had, if you didn't have lineage, you had nothing in that society. And by the way, today, it's flipped a little bit, hasn't it? We have some societies where the majority are born out of wedlock. And in fact, sometimes people are even proud. They say, for example, my mother was a very free-spirited woman, right? I don't have a lineage. I don't know who my father was. But at that time, it wasn't like this. It was very important to the people. Muawiyah approaches Ziyad and he says, Ziyad, I'm going to offer you something. Ziyad, he says, what is it? He says that I'm going to tell the people that my father Abu Sufyan, because Abu Sufyan, he was known for frequenting certain places. I will tell them that Abu Sufyan is your father and you are my brother. And you know, Abu Sufyan, the lineage that he had, of course, it wasn't the greatest after Islam, but still, he was Qurayshi. He had a very good lineage during that time period. This was enough for Ziyad to turn, to join the side of Muawiyah, and he becomes one of the greatest enemies of the Ahlul Bayt, of the Shia. And of course, his son, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, he comes from this lineage. My brothers and sisters, this issue is an issue that we need to consider, that shaitan uses tricks and traps, and he drags us from one place to another place very slowly. One of the things I always like to do is I always like to ask myself this question. What is my price to disobey Allah? Because oftentimes when it comes to these stories of Karbala, when we look at the story of Umar ibn Sa'd, Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, even Muawiyah, Yazid, what we don't realize is that we haven't been offered what they were offered. And I play this mind game sometimes with myself. I ask this question. I say that if someone was to come to you and they were to bring you a sum of money and they were to place it within your trust as an amana, and they were to say that I'm leaving this with you as a trust, no one knows about it, but I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask it back from you. What is the amount at which you would begin to think, I'm not going to tell anyone about this money, and when he comes back I'm going to say, what money? I have no idea what you're talking about. Would you do it for $500? Most of you would say, no, that's not enough. 1,000? 5,000? In the Bay Area, that's still, it's chump change, it's nothing. 50,000, 100,000, 500,000, a million, 5 million, 10 million, 500 million. Are we getting close? 1 billion, 50 billion, right? We can just keep going. Is there a point at which you would be willing to do haram, you would be willing to betray the trust of a human being? For many people, there is a point. There is a point that if they received enough money, enough reward, at that point they would be willing to betray not just a normal human being, but they would even be willing to betray the imam of their time. This is something we need to consider, that we need to purify ourselves of any of these weaknesses, because one day, inshallah, our imam is going to come, alayhi salam. We are going to be tested as others were tested. Will we also have a price in front of our imam? This is a question that we need to ask. Recite salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali. Now, many of us, we are worried about this issue that I'm going to be discussing. And it's the question of what power do the shayateen and does shaitan have in order to influence us? Because we know that shaitan, he has until the day of judgment to come and he's going to try to influence us to commit haram. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's given him one power, one ability, one superpower, if you will. And that is the ability to do what? To whisper into our minds and our hearts. That's all that he can do. You know, sometimes you go on YouTube, and I don't know why we tend to go at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. at the worst times. We begin to look at those jinn possession videos. And definitely don't do this tonight at 1 or 2 a.m. Don't do it. But there's a number of videos on jinn possession. The jinn comes in and he takes over and the person is being controlled and they're trying to remove the jinn. Generally speaking, if you don't go messing into that world, shaitan has one power. One power. He has the ability to whisper. And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He says, إِنَّ كَيْدَ الشَّيْطَانِ كَانَ ضَعِيفًا. He says, indeed, the tactic, the strategy of shaitan is really weak. Because that army that I mentioned in the beginning of tonight, that I said that imagine that an army is coming and they are about to invade your city, they are about to attack. Imagine if I told you that army, they don't have any weapons. They don't have any tanks, they don't have any planes, they don't have any guns. All that they can do is they can come up to you and they can whisper, brother, you need to give up your city, you need to leave your home. You need to do this sin, you need to do that sin. That's all the power that shaitan has within him. It's really a weak power. In essence, we need to listen to him, we need to obey him for him to have any effect on us. But shaitan, he has one talent. And I'm going to apologize beforehand if anyone works in this field. Of course, this is not related to you, but when you ask a question of what is it that shaitan does, what is shaitan's job description? You know, imagine if shaitan, he has a LinkedIn. You go on LinkedIn, you find shaitan, he has there a job description. Someone said it, he's a marketer. And again, my apologies if anyone is in marketing. Of course, shaitan, he does immoral marketing. It's not the marketing that you guys do. But the job that shaitan has, and Allah mentions this in the verses of the Holy Quran, is that he comes and he tries to manipulate your perception of reality. This reality that we see, we're looking with our eyes, with our hearts. Shaitan, he comes and he tries to manipulate it. He tries to take the greatest of the sins, the most disgusting behaviors, the most disgusting of substances, and his job is to make it appear as the most beautiful thing that your eyes have ever seen. This is what shaitan does. This is how he gets us to listen to him. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, He says, يَئِدُهُمْ وَيُمَنِّيهِمْ وَمَا يَئِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. He says that shaitan, this is what he does. He gives you promises and he excites these false hopes within you. And then Allah, He says that He doesn't promise you anything except delusion. It's all fake, it's all false. One of the examples that we see in the society around us, and this is probably the most prevalent sin within the West, within even the world. If I ask this question of what is alcohol to you? What is alcohol? If you really look at what alcohol is, it is a juice that is created from rotting fruits or rotting vegetables, right? You literally take wheat, barley, potatoes, grapes, you mash them, you allow them to rot, and then you take that and you place it in front of someone and you have to convince them to drink this disgusting beverage. And you guys know it. I mean, they have to mix these beverages with all sorts of other things to even make it drinkable. But the shaitan comes here and his job is to convince you that this disgusting liquid that is literally rotten, it's filthy, his job is to convince you that this is the greatest drink in the world. This is why sometimes you'll go on YouTube, you'll see maybe a show, and they're discussing the flavors, the subtle flavors in different wine. It's rotten grape juice. What subtle flavors? But they've convinced themselves that, for example, this one, it has a taste of coffee and cherry and this and that. It's rotten grape juice. Imagine the power of the shaitan that he has come and through generation after generation, he has done his immoral marketing and he has been able to convince these human beings that this is the greatest drink that they could drink. Recite a salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I'm going a little bit over time. I don't want to push too far, but I'm going to mention one final point. When it comes to us as believers, shaitan, he tries to trick us in different ways. The techniques that he uses are going to be different than the techniques that he uses on other people. One of the ways that shaitan manipulates our reality is that shaitan, he knows that we are all struggling to be good mu'mineen, to be good believers. And he also knows that we know that Allah has described Himself to us as the most forgiving, the most merciful. Sometimes, and this is this is something which happens, we all fall into a sin. God forbid we end up committing a sin. And one of the things that shaitan does at that moment is he approaches us and he says, that sin that you just committed, it felt really good, didn't it? Maybe you did, for example, ghibah. You were angry at someone and you finally released all of that animosity that you were holding against them. You backbit them. He comes to you and he says, that felt really good, didn't it? And you know that Allah is the most merciful. He forgives. Why don't you go and you commit that sin again? Just do it again. You have time. You're 20 years old, you're 30, you're 40, you're 50. People live till they're 100 years old these days. Go and commit that other sin. Just feel how good it feels. If he can convince you to commit that second sin, then he knows he has you. And what he's really convincing you of here is he's convincing you to delay tawbah. He's convincing you to commit one sin after another sin after another sin. And people, they fall into this and suddenly they see 5 years has gone by, 10 years has gone by, 30, 40, 50, a lifetime suddenly goes by. And they realize that the opportunities that they had as a believer has been wasted. And we don't know when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take us. We always assume, don't we, that we are going to live forever. But how often have we seen someone in their 20s, they pass away. In their teens, they pass away. In their 30s, they pass away. Allah has not given any of us a guarantee. How do we know that we are going to leave this life without having the opportunity of having done tawbah? We leave with this load of sins. But the second danger of this tactic of shaitan, and this is even worse, is that shaitan, he knows that as you begin to commit a sin, and then you commit another sin and another sin and another sin, what is happening to you? A distance is being created between you and Allah. That is literally what a sin is. It is any action that when you commit it, it creates a distance between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That if I can commit enough sins, the distance becomes an impenetrable wall. That one day somebody wakes up after a lifetime of sin and they say, who is even God? Does God even exist? I've been sinning for all of these years. In fact, I derive joy from these sins. I don't even want to go back to faith. I don't want to go back to religion. I want to do what I've been doing. It feels good. This is one of the dangers of the shaitan, that he knows that with the believers, he's not going to get you from 0 to 100, so he has to take you there very slowly. And he gets us there gradually through little sins, and then he convinces us that we don't need to do tawbah to commit another one. And this is the way that shaitan, he drags us, and eventually he takes us out of iman into disbelief. All right, this is enough inshallah for tonight. We ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He protects us from the tricks of the shaitan. He strengthens us from the tricks of the shaitan. And He allows us to reach the level of those that are closest to the Ahlul Bayt, closest to our Imams, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala. Hussein.
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein. When Fatima came to Karbala, Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. When Fatima came to Karbala, Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. Go back, O mother, they've killed my brother. Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. When Fatima came to Karbala, Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. When Fatima came to Karbala, Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. Go back, O mother, they've killed my brother. Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. When the night fell on that desert camping, a lonely voice was heard in moaning. Then she looked and saw someone approaching, one who would join her in her grieving. She had come to see her progeny and what had become of their destiny. But she could not let her to go closer. She did not want her to really see. I do not want you to go further. You will only see pain and horror. I do not want you to go further. You will only see pain and horror. Body with no head, 72 dead. Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. When Fatima came to Karbala, Zainab said, said, do not look, Ya Zahra. When Fatima came to Karbala, Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. Go back, O mother, they've killed my brother. Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. Before you were born, my loving daughter, I was shown this by your grandfather. He told me what was to befall my son and how it would be a tragedy. My brother told me of this day as well. I knew what was to become of me. But even then I could not stand witness when I saw Shimmer walking to him. My mother, you cannot bear to see what they did to his broken body. My mother, you cannot bear to see what they did to his broken body. Arrow in his heart, liver ripped apart. Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. When Fatima came to Karbala, Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. When Fatima came to Karbala, Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. Go back, O mother, they've killed my brother. Zainab said, do not, Zahra. Then her mother's eyes began to wander. Another body she had to see. A new grave had been dug in the morning. A young infant in there was buried. There lay the young Qasim, son of Hassan, and next to him the older Ali. But it was Ali Asghar she came to. They won, they killed in his father's arms. What was the sin of this poor child? When the arrow hit, he had wailed. What was the sin of this poor child? When the arrow hit, he had wailed. He cried, I'm thirsty. Had they no mercy? Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. When Fatima came to Karbala, Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. When Fatima came to Karbala, Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. Go back, O mother, they've killed my brother. Zainab said, do not look, Ya Zahra. Take me to Karbala, leave me there. Take me to Karbala, leave me there. Take me to Karbala, leave me there, leave me there. Hussein, Hussein, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Can I request everyone to recite another Surah Al-Fatiha for Mir Taqi Ali Khan, Ibn Alam Ali Khan, and all your marhumin and marhumat. Salawat. Allah.
Moulana. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد الصلاة والسلام عليك يا رسول الله الصلاة والسلام عليك يا نبي الله الصلاة والسلام على المصطفى الأمجد، الصلاة والسلام على حبيب إله العالمين بالقاسم محمد ورحمة الله وبركاته، الصلاة والسلام على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على البضعة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، الصلاة والسلام على الحسن المجتبى الولي الناصح الأمين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى لا سيما سيدي ومولاي بالفضل العباس واختي زينب. السلام عليك يا ابا عبد الله وعلى جدك وابيك وعلى امك واخيك وعلى التسعه المعصومين من بنيك، لا سيما سيدنا ومولانا صاحب العصر والزمان، عجل الله فرجه الشريف برحمتك يا ارحم الراحمين. وصلى اللهم على محمد وآل محمد الطيبين الطاهرين.